Hello, my name is Julie Lindo, and I'm the communications consultant for San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. I would like to welcome all of you to our event today, Electrification of Buildings, Climate, Health, Justice, with Antonio Diaz of Poder, people organizing to demand economic and environmental rights, Diane Bailey of Menlo Spark, and Brady Seals of the Rocky Mountain Institute. Before we start, I'd like to inform all of you that we are recording this evening, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. We organize physicians and other health professionals to defend health and demand racial, social, and environmental justice. By combining the power of community activism with the knowledge and credibility of health professionals, we promote public policies that support our intertwined areas of concentration: environmental health with a focus on the climate crisis and related environmental toxic degradation, nuclear weapons abolition and the end of the arms race, social and racial justice and the health burdens of vulnerable communities, and education of the public and the next generation of health professionals. Our 2021 events series focuses primarily on the connections between climate change, systemic racism, health inequities, and anti-nuclear issues. We will be hosting on May 26th a very important event given the recent tragic killings of many people by the police. It's titled The Public Health Crisis of Policing and Mass Incarceration, with Zach Norris of the Ella Baker Center and Dr. Jennifer James of UCSF. On June 23rd, we will be hosting an event about divestment and investment as a tool to encourage more green energy development. To learn more about our events, issues, policies, and how you can take action or donate, please visit our website at sfbapsr.org. I will be posting that in the chat. Sign up for our newsletter, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. As you listen to the speakers, please post questions in the chat, and you can find the chat by waving your mouse over the bottom of your screen. After the talks, we will host a Q&A and discussion. And at that time, we welcome all of you to show your video and to say hello to each other. We really hope that this event will be an opportunity to build community and get to know each other. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Bob Gold, President of Sfba PSR. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Really want to welcome you coming here on this beautiful evening to participate in our webinar about electrification of buildings and the framing of these issues within our perspectives on climate, health, and justice. We're focusing on electrification of buildings because after industry and transportation, buildings are a top emitter of greenhouse gases, and electrification, therefore, we see as a critical step towards decarbonization, improved health, and health equity. Natural gas appliances and heaters are proven to increase indoor air pollution and exacerbate conditions such as asthma. The health harms from indoor pollution are compounded by the high outdoor pollution levels in California, per the American Lung Association State of the Air 2020 and 2021 reports. Also, while 98% of Californians live in counties with a failing grade for at least one air pollution measurement, a person of color is 3 times more likely to live in a county with failing grades in all measurements. We find ourselves in California at a critical turning point with several groundbreaking transportation and building decarbonization bills moving through the legislature that we are amplifying and supporting with our health professional voice. In addition, we need to continue our coalition efforts towards pushing the California Energy Commission, or CEC, to demonstrate climate health leadership by developing a 2022 building energy code cycle to require all electric new construction statewide. In that regard, I just want to announce or underscore an action item that we'll have, which we'll come back to other times within tonight's presentation, particularly for people who might be joining us late. But it's basically to help all of us limit building emissions in the Bay Area. As we understand that gas appliance pollution is damaging our climate, health, and air quality, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District already has rules limiting nitrogen oxide emissions from home water heaters and furnaces, but the current standards allow pollution to persist. On April 19th, the staff of BAA Quality Management District announced the plan to work with stakeholders to develop zero nitrogen oxide emission standards for residential furnaces and water heaters. Sometime in July 2021, the staff will host a public workshop to discuss equity, affordability, and rule implementation timelines. If you're interested in joining the discussion, there'll be a form posted in the chat and Rocky Mountain Institute and other partners will send you more information later this summer so you can receive an alert about future advocacy opportunities such as these hearings. So before introducing our speakers, I want to thank our wonderful staff who've been integral to all of this and all our other events, including Tara Weeks, who's again providing our expert tech support tonight, Sarah Bakir, our student intern, and of course, Julie Lindo, who we've already met, our wonderful communications consultant. So now to move on to our first speaker, first in a lineup of wonderful people tonight. Diane Bailey is Executive Director of Menlo Spark, a community nonprofit aimed to help the city of Menlo Park and the region become carbon neutral. She also leads the campaign for fossil-free buildings in Silicon Valley. Previously, Diane worked at the Natural Resources Defense Council, Citizens for a Better Environment in Chicago, and a local transportation planning agency in Houston. She's a certified climate change professional and holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Washington University and a master's degree in environmental engineering from Rice University. It's been a great pleasure for myself and for others in our chapter to be working with Diane over the last year or so on a number of decarbonization and electrification efforts south of San Francisco, and my great pleasure to introduce her for her remarks tonight. Diane?
Well, good evening, Bob, and thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much to San Francisco Bay PSR for hosting this wonderful event. I'm going to do a share screen to load my presentation, so bear with me for just one moment. Let's see. All right, there we go. Okay, so hope you all can see that. So I'm going to be talking to you briefly about our campaign for fossil-free buildings. Oops, just one second. Technical. Okay, so here's a little summary of what I'm going to cover tonight in our mission to accelerate a phase out of fossil gas use throughout Silicon Valley and the Greater Bay Area. Just want to give a brief intro to my organization, Menlo Spark, as well as our campaign for fossil-free buildings. And then talk about some of the progress that we've had here in the Bay in phasing out fossil fuels. And then if there's time, I'd like to touch a little bit on some things that you can do to replace gas with electric in your home. Okay, so Menlo Spark is a very small community climate action nonprofit based in Menlo Park and working throughout Silicon Valley. We started in 2015 with an aim to take the city of Menlo Park climate neutral by 2025. We have grand plans, and we're trying to get other cities to act as well to phase out fossil fuels and move to a zero carbon economy as swiftly as possible. Why are we doing that? Well, you're all here probably because you know and care about climate impacts. We're all feeling the climate impacts already, probably sooner than most of us thought or imagined. And I'm not going to get into the details too much. I think you all are familiar, but 2020 was one of the hottest years on record. It tied with 2016 and also had one of the worst fire seasons we've ever experienced. And those fire seasons, everyone's impacted, even if you're not experiencing the wildfires directly. We're all impacted by the hazardous air quality, and that's taken a very serious toll on our health, sending hundreds and thousands more children to the ER for asthma attacks and other really serious health consequences of breathing all that wood smoke. So why are we focused so much on fossil fuels? Well, they are the #1 contributor to climate change by a lot. And I'm going to focus my remarks on natural gas, also known as fossil gas or methane gas, because natural gas has kind of gone under the radar for a long time. A lot of folks think it's a clean fuel, but it is in fact a fossil fuel. And most of the natural gas that we use here in California is coming from fracking, which is incredibly destructive. And the contributions to climate impacts are actually a lot greater than we've realized. Over recent years, we've discovered that it's leaking a lot, and the impacts of gas, which is comprised of methane, it's a potent global warming pollutant, 80 times more potent than CO2. So those climate impacts are enormous. I'm going to set health impacts aside. They're very serious from methane gas, especially from cooking and using the gas in our homes. And I know another speaker is going to cover that. And you all are familiar with the safety impacts of gas. I'm sure everyone can remember when the pipeline under San Bruno ruptured, but there are actually daily leaks and fires and smaller explosions from gas use throughout the nation. And those can be pretty serious. Surprisingly, when you replace natural gas with clean electric, you can actually save money and improve the comfort in your home. And so I think it's nice to focus on some of those benefits, although the truth is that climate is motivating our work on phasing out natural gas use. To put gas use and the level of pollution from gas use in perspective, if you compare all of the fossil gas used in the appliances in our homes and buildings, they produce up to 6 or 7 times more smog-forming NOx pollution compared to all of the gas power plants in California. So this is a huge source and something that we absolutely have the technology to replace. So several years ago, we worked together with some local groups in Silicon Valley to launch the Fossil Free Buildings campaign. And our goal was to accelerate a phase out of all fossil gas use throughout San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, and beginning with new construction. We're made up of 35 different member groups. You can find our members on our website, fossilfreebuildings.org. This is us at a planning retreat before we were on this crazy lockdown. Despite the COVID pandemic, we've had a lot of policy progress. We've focused on so-called REACH codes. These are policies that deal with new construction, reaching beyond the state standards for energy. Most of the REACH codes in our area are actually requiring all electric new construction. There are a couple of exceptions, but they're really moving the bar a long way. In total, there are 22 such policies that cover new construction in Silicon Valley, and that's half of the statewide total. And actually most of the statewide total is here in the Bay Area, even if you're not in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. So we're really the epicenter for action and really a springboard for statewide action and a movement towards eliminating gas use in new construction. So this year, our campaign is focusing on some new initiatives. We are starting to focus a lot more on equity impacts of this transition off of gas. We're ramping up community outreach programs, looking at accessible financing, and we're looking at new policies that touch existing homes and buildings, helping people transition, and in some case, fighting for policies that require a transition as appliances are replaced. And if there's time later, I'd like to talk a little bit about that because there are a number of new policies that are very exciting. So one of the tools in our toolbox for the Fossil Free Buildings campaign is working with community choice energy providers. These are ringing the Bay now. Our local community choice energy provider is Peninsula Clean Energy, but I think almost all the counties now have their own or have joined existing providers. And that's really accelerated a move towards zero carbon electricity, which helps us transition from gas to electric, knowing that the result will be zero carbon. So working with these agencies, we are focusing on equity. I'm not going to cover everything on this slide, just want to touch on the ability of these power providers to really have a game-changing impact on this transition from gas, focusing on equity, providing funding and financing programs, performing outreach and education, as well as market development of new products new heat pump and electric products to help us phase out gas. There are just two programs that I want to highlight, and I'm probably running short on time here. When it comes to transitioning affordable housing and low-income homeowners, it can be kind of tricky. Peninsula Clean Energy is about to launch a turnkey electrification program that will help low-income homeowners. These are care customers who qualify for discounts on their utility bill. It will provide full electrification as well as several home upgrades for about 200 homes a year just to start with. And we think these are the kinds of proactive programs that could spread throughout the Bay Area and really make an example of putting equity first as we electrify everything. And there are some innovative funding and financing programs. I'm going to skip those, and if there's time, we can come back to those. So one thing I want to note is that a lot of incentive programs to help people transition to all electric have been around a long time, and they haven't made a lot of a dent. And that's because sometimes voluntary programs by themselves can be very slow to phase positive changes in. So we know that goodwill alone can't phase out fossil gas entirely. And that's why we're working on some standards that will require new appliances that formerly use gas to be electric as they're installed. And Dr. Gould touched on the Bay Area Air District standards. That's one approach where they're moving to a zero emission standard for new heaters and water heaters, and that can be really effective. As well, there are some cities that are looking at a so-called replace on burnout measure. Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and Half Moon Bay are all looking at requiring electric products as you replace old gas-using appliances. So if I have another moment, I just want to mention that there are a lot of tools out there that can help folks who want to electrify their homes, even where it's not required. If you're looking at the health issues or safety issues or want to be proactive on climate and reducing fossil fuels, we worked with a consulting firm called Redwood Energy that does a lot of electrification work directly with developers. And they helped us create this guidebook with how-to tips and case studies, and as well a full product guide to help homeowners who want to make the switch. And I'll put the URL for this guide into the chat later if you want to use that as a resource. And just wrapping up here, a few more programs on outreach. Our Fossil Free Buildings campaign just created a new electric home ambassador program. And we'll be distributing lawn signs that look like this image. And we'll also be creating a database of ambassadors of homeowners who have already electrified some or all of their home and are willing to talk to their neighbors and help other community members make the switch. And with that, we hope that's a cheaper approach than free consulting. So we hope this neighbor to neighbor approach can help not just raise visibility to the need to electrify and also help mainstream it, but also truly help people who are finding it a little bit difficult. Maybe their contractor is telling them that they should stick with gas appliances. We hope that these ambassadors can help folks make that switch. So just wrapping up, I invite all of you to join our campaign for fossil-free buildings, join the movement. There's a whole movement nationally to electrify everything, and it's really gaining speed. And I want to emphasize that we're not saying that phasing out fossil fuels in homes or buildings will be easy, but we do know that we need to get it done as soon as possible, and that it's harming our health the longer that we wait. We know that it's going to take all of us working together, so please roll up your sleeves and join us. And also, it's really important to keep equity at the center and just keep focusing on the equity needs to make sure that low-income homeowners don't get left behind as we make this transition. Climate justice is really at the center of our climate action, and the communities come first. So thank you so much. Here's my contact info. And again, I'll drop a couple of links in the chat for you all, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Diane. And that was a really great presentation, and we'll have time, I anticipate, to be able to return to some of the other issues that you raised for the larger discussion. And to folks, just noting that a number of people have raised some questions in the chat, and our intention is to go through the presentation, and we can get to those questions as part of our discussion. So next, it's my great pleasure to welcome Antonio Díaz, who's the organizational director at Poder, People Organizing to Demand Economic and Environmental Rights, which is a grassroots environmental justice organization based in San Francisco. Antonio has over 20 years of experience developing and implementing policies and programs that address a range of climate and environmental issues. Poder organizes with Latinx immigrant families and youth to put into practice people-powered solutions that are locally based, community-led, and environmentally just. Originally from Texas, Antonio was a founder of People Organized in Defense of Earth and Her Resources, also Poder, a grassroots environmental justice organization in Austin, Texas, and the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, a binational environmental justice movement alliance. Antonio served as a member of the National Advisory Committee for the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. In an effort to successfully create an environmental sustainable city, Antonio has connected the success of Poder's local work to regional, state, national, and international alliances, including through San Francisco Rising, Bay Rising, California Environmental Justice Alliance, and the Climate Justice Alliance as well. Just before turning it over to Antonio, I just also want to underscore, we were talking about it prior to getting on tonight, but the absolute tremendous resource that Poder in collaboration with the Emerald Cities Collaborative produced, which is the Climate Equity and Community Engagement and Building Electrification Toolkit, which we'll also post on our resources and in the chat as well, which is just an absolutely terrific resource that was published towards the end of last year. So again, it's my great pleasure to welcome Antonio.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate the introduction. Very generous introduction. Just want to make sure before I proceed, can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up, thanks.
Yes.
Great. You know, in this Zoomified world nowadays, you know, you kind of have to make sure we're pressing the right buttons and all that. So once again, I want to thank the PSR Bay Area team, PSR San Francisco folks for inviting me to this important conversation. I'm going to focus my comments on energy equity and building electrification in San Francisco, which is, as Bob mentioned, you know, where the organization that I'm the director of is based and does the majority of its work. Poder, as an environmental justice organization, was formed about 30 years ago. Well, in fact, exactly 30 years ago this year. We were born out of the emergence of the environmental justice movement in the United States, a movement that people of color led to address the legacies of racist land use practices and policies by government and industry that were polluting our communities, but also to advance people-powered solutions or community-based solutions for environmental justice. So I've been at Poder for slightly over 20 years, and we work locally in San Francisco, but definitely work in alliances across the city, the region, throughout the state and beyond. In fact, we have collaborated on statewide policy work with your colleagues at PSR LA. Now, in terms of the climate crisis, you know, once again, I think the next two slides are going to go kind of fast. You know, we've been talking about this. This is the context of the work that we're doing and why building electrification is so important. You know, the climate crisis has hit home. We've experienced it in terms of extreme heat events, in terms of wildfires and the attendant poor air quality that has tremendous public health impacts, in terms of the sea level rise. There's no clear way to demonstrate that than with this following slide. This is the cityscape of San Francisco, both the top and the bottom. It's the same location of the photo, but the bottom one is the photo from during the fires and the heavy smoke that enveloped all of us, not only in the city, but throughout the Bay and across the state. Once again, just putting into great relief the fact that that the climate crisis is here, and therefore there's a need for action. Now, we know that in terms of the need for action, though, that we need to address the fact that there are disproportionate impacts on certain communities regarding environmental harm and also climate injustices. As these maps show, these are two maps from the San Francisco Department of Public Health. And in terms of health vulnerability and flood vulnerability, the neighborhoods, the census areas, but the neighborhoods most impacted are in Southeast San Francisco. That is the portions of the city where low income and communities of color reside. We know that race is a #1 predictor of environmental burdens. Within the environmental justice movement, we can point back to the 1987 report by the Commission for Racial Justice on Toxic Waste and Race, which documented that, and there's numerous reports since then. I mean, we can look at the various iterations of the CalEnviro screen here in California. And as Bob mentioned in his opening comments, the American Lung Association, the most recent report on state of the air, in which we recognize that communities of color are hit first and worst by our changing climate and environmental injustices. And it's for this reason that if we're going to advance climate solutions, it's for this reason if we're going to work towards climate justice, we need to address racial justice. We need to think about how we're addressing issues of building electrification within the context of energy equity, about how energy should be affordable, how energy should be clean, how energy should be resilient, and how communities of color need to be at the table to prepare for the transition for a clear, clean energy economy. All of these are crucial if we're going to address climate from an equity perspective. Now, our work in terms of building electrification actually it relates to San Francisco's update of its climate action plan. These are the different sections of the city's action plan. Buildings is a pillar of this, including housing, transportation, water, etc. We were actually invited because the city of San Francisco, through the Department of the Environment, was involved in an initiative with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network with USDN on 0 cities, looking at building electrification and equity. And so we were invited to be engaged in this process by the city. And then, as Bob mentioned, we work closely with Emerald City, San Francisco to develop the work. Once again, I mean, I'll be brief around this. In San Francisco, Diane made reference to this, Bob made reference to it, but like in San Francisco, buildings are second only to transportation in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So this speaks to the reason why we're focused on buildings in this evening's conversation, and the different strategies that are needed to move us in that direction. Now, as I mentioned, we engage in this process of with the city on equity and residential building electrification. We co-led this effort with Emerald City's Bay Area and work closely with the Department of the Environment to establish this stakeholder process to come up with actions and strategies on residential building electrification. We use the HEMIS principles of democratic organizing as a guidance. These are some principles that speak to how we can work together, recognizing that there's inequities in terms of power that might be held based on whether if it's a government participation, community-based organizations, labor, et cetera, and so we use these principles in guiding our work. I will say that it was these principles were instructive and useful, not only in terms of our community engagement, but also in our work together with the Department of the Environment. In that in the year and a half effort that we engaged with the city's Department of the Environment, it was important that we work together in a way that uplifted inclusivity, working together in solidarity and mutuality, building just relationships, recognizing that the equity that we're seeking is not only in terms of the policy outcome, but also the approach that we take and the process by which we're getting there. Both of those are important, and we're going to be doing climate work in an equitable fashion. As I mentioned, through the stakeholder process that we engaged in, we brought over 250 people. Initially, as that photographs indicates, through face-to-face meetings and conversations and small group discussions. As the effort went on, it was through virtual meetings, given that the COVID-19 impacted all of us. But we engaged stakeholders on issues related to workforce. In that instance, it was key to have labor at the table to address the concerns and opportunities that exist in terms of workforce development. We engage affordable housing developers and others in terms of deed-restricted affordable housing. We engage city agencies around non-deed-restricted low-income housing and other partners to come up with strategies and actions that centered equity. Throughout this process, it actually informed that toolkit that Bob mentioned at the beginning, that we since subsequently have been sharing with other cities and towns as a methodology that could be used in terms of advancing equity and building electrification, with a focus on how we can do it with equity at the center. So that's one of the key tools that came out of this important process. Now, where we're at with this process is that these recommendations, these strategies and actions have been incorporated into the update of the city's climate action plan, which currently the city is finalizing. So part of what's happening next is obviously making sure that these strategies and actions are incorporated in the climate action update, but also that we advance policies that address specific concerns that came up through our process. That we address issues like rent evictions, that we address issues like pass-throughs, issues that would impact low-income tenants. And obviously in San Francisco, a city in which a majority of the residents are tenants, it's a huge issue. We raised up the issue and the importance of having financial and educational resources and support for low-income tenants as well. And finally, in terms of issues around workforce development and training, the need to prepare the labor force to be engaged in these jobs and make sure that these jobs are high road for the workers. Now, another aspect concurrent to our process with the city of San Francisco was that one of the supervisors of the city, Supervisor Gordon Marr, requested that the budget and legislative analysts do a report on the elimination of natural gas usage in residential buildings. The report is final. It's about to be released, and there'll be a hearing. I'll make sure that I pass the information about when the hearing will be held to folks at the PSR, so that could be shared with all of you. Important to participate and raise the importance of doing the residential building electrification with equity at the center. And finally, I'll leave you all with this that last point around next steps, is the importance and need to support utility relief campaigns. What we're facing now because of COVID and the economic downturn is a vast number of residents in San Francisco and the Bay, throughout the state and throughout the country, that are facing burdensome utility bills and potential cutoffs because of the impact of the pandemic. So TURN, the Utility Reform Network, has a Power at Home campaign. There's information there about who to contact. The Reclaim Our Power campaign is also doing work on this issue. So it's important to be engaged in these local campaigns that are addressing utility relief, because as much as it's important to advance building electrification, residential building electrification, and equity, we need to address these immediate needs that that hard-hit communities have in the here and now. So I'll leave it at that. And I want to thank you all for participating here. And there's my contact information, and look forward to being involved in this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Antonio, for really underscoring the central equity issues that we all have to have in mind in terms of our work and how to frame it. And also, thank you so much for pointing us to the opportunities that I'm sure many members of our chapter and those we reach will be wanting to take part in, particularly in my home city of San Francisco, so we could really bring the health voice to all of this. I'd like to now turn to Brady Seals, our next speaker, before we enter into our Q&A period. Brady Seals is a manager in the Rocky Mountain Institute's carbon-free buildings program, where she works at the junction of air quality, buildings, and human health. She engages stakeholders in rapidly transitioning to clean energy solutions that deliver environmental, health, and economic benefits. She's a lead author in partnership with PSR and other organizations such as Sierra Club and Mothers Out Front in a recent report on health effects from gas stoves. And also as part of that PSR partnership, some of our leading chapter experts on those issues as well. Prior to this role, Brady spent 11 years working in over 16 countries to accelerate the transition from highly polluting wood stoves to cleaner, more efficient cook stoves that are also protective of human health. It's been a great pleasure for me to work with Brady over the last year, particularly with Rocky Mountain Institute and other organizations mentioned in terms of turning up at the California Energy Commission hearings and testimony to push the codes. We'll get back to that action item at the conclusion of our talks today as well. So Brady, welcome.
Great. Thanks so much, Bob, for that intro, and for all of you for spending the evening with us. This is very exciting, and so happy to be here. I have a jam-packed PowerPoint, and so just bear with me 10 minutes, and let's go on this ride of building electrification together. So for those of you who don't know, RMI is actually now the organization formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute. We just went through a rebrand, a part of trying to take our effort global. So we've doubled in the year and a half that I've been there. We now are 300 people, and I have to give a shout out to our newest employee who I see has joined us today, Emma, who's going to be working with me on health and air quality and has joined us from the CDC. So thank you, Emma, for spending your East Coast evenings with us on your third day. So RMI, we've been around for 40 years. And our team is focused on carbon-free buildings. How do we decarbonize these buildings? And I think that we're taking a holistic view. There's a lot more we can do and be better. And when Antonio was speaking, I was certainly thinking of ways that we can grow and improve. But I want to hit on the greatest hits here: climate, health, and then equity and justice, with one slide on the year in review in California. So why health for decarbonization? Globally, buildings are actually the largest global contributor to climate change. 40% of global emissions when you take into account all the carbon in the materials as well as the emissions. So on a global scale, this is huge. And the other thing is that buildings are really all about people. We spend 90% of our time in buildings pre-pandemic. That may be closer to 99 now, but this is really a people issue. And we know that healthy buildings are critical for the just transition of our energy system. There are so many co-benefits that it really makes this an issue that I think we can bring in lots of fellow travelers. So just a couple of points on climate. I said that buildings make up 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In the US, the story is 10%. So fossil fuels in buildings is responsible for 10% of our US greenhouse gas emissions. And it's crazy because it really boils down to three things that we do in our homes, which is heating our space, heating our water, and cooking. So you can see this breakdown, and what we're talking about, the big bogey here is 70 million buildings that still burn fossil fuels. How do we address this while trying to make sure that we're not building new fossil fuel buildings? And California, this is really interesting, about 10 states are responsible for 56% of those 10%. And California is number 2 with a whopping 8%. So we're really excited to see this wave of building decarbonization that has happened in California. We're in a race here with New York. I think you're going to catch them, but it's really critical that California is a first mover on this. California also ranks second in the US for total annual natural gas delivery in buildings. And I also learned that California is adding new gas customers faster than any other state. So the gas industry often says that they add a new customer every minute. And the climate and our health are really at stake here. And I think when you see this chart, you get a sense for the importance that California plays. So switching gears to health, and we have to start with indoor air pollution and the gas stove. So indoor air is often worse than our outdoor air. And the EPA, when you go to their website, it says that our indoor air is 2 to 5 and as high as 100 times more polluted than outdoor air. One of the primary drivers of that is the gas stove. So we've talked a bit about the nitrogen dioxide. It's odorless, colorless. It's been an underlooked, I think, pollutant, considering particulate matter and others, but the gas stove, and this is from the EPA's big science assessment as well, we know that gas stoves are a major source of this nitrogen dioxide. So in the country, there's about 40 million or 40 to 43 million gas stoves. So the average is that in the US, about 1 in 3 stoves are gas, about 35%. But this really depends on where you live. And part of that number is because the Southeast is a lot more electrified. So in California, almost twice as many of our stoves are gas stoves. And I think this goes to show, again, why California is such a prime first mover state to make big plays on building electrification. So Bob mentioned this, a report that we put out almost a year ago with Physicians for Social Responsibility, National Mothers Out Front, and Sierra Club. And if you ever need a fact checker, Bob is your guy. So this report has been meticulously fact checked by Bob, and we really appreciate his support as a reviewer. So we put out this report, and one of the first things we tried to do was differentiate the major pollutants from cooking food, and then what are the pollutants that come from the gas itself if you don't have anything on there. And so we're going to talk a lot about nitrogen dioxide. There's carbon monoxide, particulate matter, formaldehyde, and a lot of other toxins in our gas. But for this purpose, I just want to start with this one statistic, which is probably, if you remember anything from my talk, it's this one, which is the latest meta-analysis that we have says that children who live in a home with a gas stove have a 42% increased risk of experiencing asthma symptoms or current asthma, and a 24% chance of being diagnosed with asthma by a doctor. So this is significant. We don't know what the proportion in the states are of asthma that's triggered by the gas stove. And part of that is because gas stoves aren't always recognized as a trigger, and nitrogen dioxide isn't always recognized as a trigger. And this is what I think that you are helping us change. And we've seen this dialogue changing in California. We know that children are more susceptible to air pollution, and it's a really good reason to address the pollution in our homes. So we don't have indoor air quality guidelines on a national level. However, California does. But when we compare them to outdoor 1-hour standards, we see that baking a cake in a gas oven, you can get a nitrogen dioxide reading of 230. And we know outdoors, the 1-hour standard is 100. So we're seeing high levels of NO2 emitted indoors. The best evidence we have is respiratory and asthma, but there are other health effects that we're learning about, like cardiovascular, etc. So our recommendations are sort of reduce your exposure as you can, opening a window, using a range hood, and then ultimately, how do we transition to a plug-in induction stove that's maybe more affordable, but how can we make the big transition to electric or induction alternatives possible and affordable? So we have a lot of recommendations for policymakers. You can see these here. I'm gonna go through. I told you I had a lot. Let's just spend a moment on outdoor air pollution. So buildings are now the #1 source of pollution-related premature deaths when you take into account wood and gas and everything we burn in our buildings. So this is an MIT study that found, I just think you look at road going down, power plants going down, industry going down, and buildings are going up. Next week, we have a study coming out with Harvard that's looking at the health impact of buildings by state. We'll have it broken down by burning gas, burning wood, burning oil. This is a little sneak preview, but we hope you'll help us share these results. And it really quantifies both in premature deaths and the billion-dollar health costs. What is all this burning doing to our health and to really the economic value of it? A study that came out last year in UCLA shows you that San Francisco Bay Area would see the most health benefits from a switch to electric appliances. So if you see your Bay Area here and you see the color, this is what the UCLA researchers found what the total reduction in PM would be and how that would equate for all-cause mortality. The savings were serious. So the study found a total of $3.5 billion that could be saved, and a lot of that would be from the Bay Area. So there's the most to gain from electrifying all the appliances. Just on equity and justice, and I think Antonio gave a great overview of this. And just to hit on, we believe that there's some main factors of why lower income households may be more susceptible to gas stove pollution. Things like smaller unit size, more people per home, already having asthma in the first place, which we know is a profoundly inequitable disease. It's the #1 chronic disease in children. I'm talking to a lot of doctors and health professionals, so I know you know this, but in California, it's more than 1 in 7 children, and in some counties, it's 1 in 4. So again, why California, we feel like, is such a prime state to be a first mover in this. We know the health cost isn't zero. We don't have the number yet. We know in California, there's 5.2 roughly Californians with asthma. We know what the cost is to treat that. And the cost of an electric stove could be more minimal, but we need to bring these costs down. So one of the things that we're spending a lot of time thinking about is how can we quantify these and get these numbers to policymakers who can really start to take some action. And this is my last slide. So this is our year in review. I want to just say nothing on this slide would be possible, I think, in part, if we didn't have the great health voices, PSR San Francisco, our other PSR chapters. I think I saw Har from Colorado on here, PSR National, Climate Health Now, who has been showing up, commenting, giving personal and professional testimonies on why it's so critical that we act now to electrify. We had a big win in the CEC building code where we got differentiated range hood requirements for gas and electric. First time that's ever happened in the country. All electric code. I think my colleague Johnny was on here earlier, who's in the Bay Area, who's been really working on that. We're waiting to hear what will happen with bated breath, but we're really pushing for an all electric new construction statewide code. We mentioned the air districts. And I also want to say that the California Air Resources Board has committed to updating their indoor air quality guidelines for NO2. They're 25 years outdated, and given the latest evidence, we are hoping for a health-based standard. The CEC is also putting $1 million, probably not enough, but to do a randomized controlled trial on looking at the health outcomes of changing over gas stoves to electric stoves and asthma outcomes in low income and environmental justice communities. So that's it for me. It's a lot. Thanks for this, and looking forward to our discussion together.
Well, thanks to just everyone for really superb presentations. And so I'm not sure if Tara is going to reconfigure us to be able to, at this point, to be able to see each other and raise questions. I will note that there were two questions raised in the chat, one by Dr. Jeff Ritterman around reamping a home with specific questions. Barb Ernie raising a question about impacts of the induction type of stoves for people with pacemakers. I think that some of the speakers have provided information that's been shared in the chat. If not, if that doesn't answer the questions, we can get back to that. I wanted to, a lot of the issues that you all have raised have pointed to, parallel issues. We really need to move as quickly as we can. We obviously have our action statement that we've discussed and has been reinforced about being able to weigh in with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District in terms of their rulemaking and a real need for people to join that effort that Brady will help organize as well through Rocky Mountain Institute. A number of us on the call have had recent experience in terms of legislation on banning fracking and providing setbacks of oil and gas operations as references to Senate Bill 467 that founded this year due to major opposition, of course, from the oil and gas industry, but also with strong opposition from a number of the trade unions who are involved in that industry. And in a parallel way, certainly from weighing in on some of the California Energy Commission hearings and such, we've had parallel issues that have come up, which basically come to our collective issue of being able to develop and have a compelling and real just transition for workers and communities on these industries that cause such pollution, health problems, and of course, accelerate our climate emergency. So I'd be interested in the perspectives of all of our speakers into the challenges that you've seen in terms of moving these things forward, which are so compelling, but nonetheless are very much at the heart of the equity and just transition issues we're discussing. So I'd open it up to our speakers. Anybody want to talk about their experiences or what they see our challenges on the horizon are in terms of electrification in California or throughout the country?
Well, I'm happy to share some of the challenges and also some of the strategies to overcome them in Silicon Valley and getting the REACH codes adopted. We were aiming to get just 1 or 2 REACH codes adopted, maybe over 3 years, and wound up with 22. And Daly City was the latest. I think they'll be number 23 as of last night. There are significant challenges in terms of perceived cost, that there are a lot of misunderstandings that gas is so much more efficient and so much less costly than electric. Part of that is a little true. Sometimes the electric rates can be more expensive, but electric products, the ones on the market today, are about 4 or 5 times more efficient than the comparable gas products. So when you're building new construction, in virtually every sector that's been modeled, we know that there will be financial savings, but those myths persist. But one other challenge I want to highlight is reliability of the grid. This has been a persistent challenge throughout California. I think I've been to dozens of REACH code hearings, and every city council or county board is concerned about, if we can't keep the lights on, what are we doing electrifying our other appliances? But there again, there are some unhelpful myths that we can beat back. And that's that new gas appliances just don't work when the power is out. And so the solution is not hang on to the dirty, polluting appliances, because when you do new construction or replace with a gas water heater or heater, that device is just not going to work. They're the new devices can't have pilot lights that are continuous, they're electronically controlled. So that really the solution is hardening the grid, trying to prevent these public safety power shutoffs, and providing a whole lot more energy storage so that we can rely on renewables continuously.
Other thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I would say that, you know, in San Francisco, I think that we have seen some good progress. You know, there's a natural gas ban on new construction that was adopted. Already, you know, there's affordable housing developers that are building new affordable housing buildings that are all electric. Actually, we're moving to a new building in the Mission District later in the year. It's an all electric affordable housing building. So, you know, I think that there's progress that's happening. I think the huge challenge is around existing buildings and existing residential buildings, and the costs and even, you know, in a city like San Francisco, you know, the housing stock you know, provides some challenges to build outs. So I mean, I don't think any of these things are insurmountable, but I do think that there's really good thinking that needs to happen as to how we transform existing residential buildings to the scale that's needed in a cost-effective way, while tending to concerns that might be like unintended consequences. As I said, in our planning efforts or stakeholder engagement efforts, you know, tenant rights activists spoke about concerns in terms of pass-throughs to tenants, about renovictions, et cetera, et cetera. So I think good policy needs to be established on that end too, to be coupled with, you know, REACH codes and, you know, other efforts to electrify existing residential building stock. And I know, Bob, just in last quick comment, you raised the challenge.
You're mute.
You're muted, Antonio.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, that there have been challenges with labor. At the same time, for example, labor got on board with a natural gas ban in terms of new construction in San Francisco. So I think it's making the case that there might be some challenges among some sectors of the building trades, but there's also good jobs that get created. So, you know, kind of pointing to those opportunities that exist in tandem.
Brady, you have any thoughts before we open it up?
Sure, maybe just more underscoring. I completely agree. Two points I would make is retrofits is the big thorny one, and it gets into cost and it really gets into equity. That's why a lot of our efforts have been focused, and RMI is known for its techno-economic analysis. We know that it's cheaper to build all electric. It's costly to retrofit, and I think taking a holistic view of all the steps. If you start a renovation project on your home and someone asks this question, you may start to learn that there's a lot more things, replacing your electrical out, adding things on, and that dovetails into my other one, which is sometimes the awareness can be very low from contractors or folks that you may reach out to. So when you work for RMI, and every time a bad experience, you get your friend or a family member calling you. And so I think that it's hard to find people who can install these appliances sometimes, maybe not as much in California, but there's this education and knowledge and training gap that I think we have to move quickly on, and it's already happening. But how do we reach all the little mom and pop shops, and how do we find the right way to incentivize this? So yes, retrofits, training, and still some work to do on awareness.
Thank you, Brady. Tom Newman raised a question in the chat, and that Patrice Sutton had some response to, but is Tom able to voice it, or Tom, would you like me to?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, if you want to, feel free. You want to make it interactive. Thanks, Tom.
I've been trying, we're doing a big renovation in our church, and I've been trying to get them to electrify. And one of the problems is exactly what Jeff Ritterman brought up, which is they told us tens of thousands of dollars to get a higher, amperage panels in to be able to support electric heat and stove. And the other thing is just in terms of our budget, when I priced it out using the current rates for, the cost per BTU for electricity versus gas, even under the most optimistic assumptions, the best I could get it down to was 50% more for electricity than for gas in terms of, per 100,000 BTUs. And that's at the lowest tier electricity rates. And then also you worry, okay, if you start using a bunch more electricity, then you bounce up to a higher rate and the cost per kilowatt hour goes up a bunch more.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. We've been looking at this for a long time with the consulting firm Redwood Energy. And it's interesting because a lot of the models are, predicting higher costs sometimes when you switch from gas to electric. But in practice, people are saving money when they switch from gas to electric. And so you're right that the rates right now make it a little difficult. And one of the keys to saving money as you electrify is having solar panels. So for homes that can have solar panels, and especially if you can add battery energy storage, then you can save a lot of money because you can start shifting your load and avoiding those peak times of the peak time of day when the rates are the highest. For folks who can't install solar, it's true that the rates are tricky, but I'll add that when you electrify, some of those appliances you can use to load shift, meaning like a water heater can be used to store the heat. And so if you program it right, you can use it to save some money by avoiding those peak times. In terms of upgrading your electrical panel, if you ask an electrician, they'll always tell you, oh yeah, you need to make upgrades here. But in reality, you can fit a lot onto a 100 amp panel. That's the standard for older homes in California before you need to upgrade. And now there are a lot of load sharing devices that have come onto the market to make it really easy. So if you add EV charging, for instance, you don't necessarily have to charge your car while you're running the dryer or cooking. Those are interruptible loads. So those load sharing devices can help you kind of piece together on a small panel all of the electrification needs without sacrificing anything on lifestyle. But the savings, I'll turn it over to the other panel members, but just real quick, on average, the savings when you convert from gas to electric have I think over recent years been about $500 a year when you convert. It's true that some of the new rate structures could complicate that though.
So that's if you convert and add solar panels?
If you add solar panels, you will definitely save money. Yeah, the complication is under the new rate structure. If you can't add solar, then sometimes the electric rates can be quite expensive.
Yeah.
And,
I'm worried that if we push this too hard, that people will see their high utility bills and they'll be pushed back and we'll sort of lose ground. And so I wonder if the direction that I know some people are heading is putting a price on the carbon, which will then make the clean energy cheaper than the natural gas. And then people will be happy because then when they do this, they'll actually save money. Whereas currently that's not the case. And so they'll, if people, and members of our congregation have told me this, that their bills are way higher after they did this and they're unhappy.
Yeah, just one more thing I want to note is that usually when you electrify, there's also a lot of room for efficiency improvements. And so we need to really be careful to pair those efficiency improvements with electrification so that people will save money.
also, Tom, I want to point out Robert Whitehair in the chat has had a very good experience. And so he might be someone for you to talk with.
Okay, thanks.
And we have, unless Brady and Antonio, did you have anything you wanted to add? Yes, Antonio.
No, I didn't have anything to add. Sorry.
I would
Brady?
just add quickly, Tom, one of the things that RMI is doing is trying to help develop some models so that you can go in and plug in things and add in the efficiency piece that Diane was saying, plus the costs. And we have a nice thing about RMI, we have the buildings team, the electricity team, et cetera. So we've been getting together and working on things, and we just launched yesterday a utility hub. So if this is a project that's ongoing and you have some of those figures and maybe you want some RMIers to take a look at it, if you want to send me an email, I'd be happy to see what you guys have and maybe we can plug it into some of our some of our prototypes.
Patrice Sutton had, oh, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, if you, maybe your email's up higher on in the chat, because maybe I can send you the spreadsheet that I created that used the, the price per 100,000 BTUs and all the assumptions I made, and you can tell me if I made a mistake.
Patrice Sutton had a question. Are there any subsidies? Mentioning when she got solar a long time ago, there were local, state and federal subsidies. Is this a policy option being considered at this time at any level of government?
Yes, there are loads of subsidies now. Oh, I guess we'll call them incentives and rebates, not subsidies, but there are still the tax credits for renewables. So that would be for solar, energy storage as well. And then if you're installing a heat pump water heater, there are now a lot of rebates. It is right now tied to your energy service provider. So whichever utility you're using, the rebates are not consistent across the Bay Area or across California, but they're growing, and there are efforts to make them more consistent. For a new heat pump water heater in my county, San Mateo County, for example, the rebates are now $2,500. And Robert Whitehair will tell you that that erases the cost difference right there.
Barb Ernie had a question earlier. Barb, are you still on? Do you want to raise the question about pacemakers and induction issues yourself, or do you get an answer?
I'm here. Thank you. I just, I got the document that someone's put in the chat and I just took a look at it. This concern was raised by a physician who used to be on the board with me at Actera. And she bought an induction stove, not realizing the pacemaker issues. And she can't get her church to put in an induction stove because they're afraid of the liability if one of their, as Tom may have run into, if one of their parishioners gets too close to the stove and didn't know it was not compatible with their pacemaker, they're afraid of the liability. So they are not putting in. So I think running into induction stoves in public places is an issue that we as physicians need to be able to address fairly confidently on what to tell them, or if it's just not safe for them to have an induction stove when they don't know who might get near it. So I wanted to find out what you all thought about that.
Thanks, Barbara. I posted those talking points in the chat, and this is a really good question. It's come up a lot. We looked into this and tried to do research and basically could not find a definitive, comprehensive answer. So the talking points put in is sort of like, it's unclear the evidence that we have. We reached out to pacemaker manufacturers. We tried to reach out to a lot of different people. So with that, there's some studies I have from Germany who's been doing more testing. They have a lot more induction stoves around there who seem to say that it's not so much of an issue. We've also gotten the same question about induction and radiation concerns, which that one there seems to be a bit more research about and seems less concerning. The pacemaker, I think kind of like our default now is that having an electric smooth top may be the best option if it's something to worry about. But unfortunately, then you don't have the pollution issue, but you don't get as much savings on the efficiency. And that's one of the huge benefits of induction. So I will say that from my research, I feel if I was a doctor and a patient asked me, I wouldn't feel like I had the literature and the health evidence to give a definitive. So maybe would defer to that electric smooth food top, which is what I have in my kitchen, but it would be fantastic if we start raising the elevation and, you know, ask CEC, ask CARB, ask some of these other people to fund a study so we can hopefully get some more information about this issue. I don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that I put in a, when my 30-year-old furnace finally died, my gas furnace, I put in a heat pump. And even though I called companies that put in heat pumps, they said, why would you do that? You already have the gas hookup. It's going to cost you 3 times more, which it did, to put in the heat pump, and it cost me more in electricity to run it. So it is really a concern with somebody who's replacing, that even the people that replace it try to talk you out of it, because it is, you know, and they said, why would you do this? And I said, because it's the right thing, I have to do it. But for people who are on more of a budget, it really wouldn't have been affordable. So just wanted to throw that out there on, you know, new construction is great, but replacing things is tough.
Any other responses before we go to other questions? I guess we're going to need more information, Barb, on that range of issues. And maybe this question that Jeff Mann has raised might help in terms of, you know, how will these things get paid for, et cetera. He's raising in the chat, if Biden is able to pass a clean energy standard, is this going to have an effect on encouraging electrification of buildings and residences? Anyone want to address that?
Yes, it will. And we've got a lot of smart Californians working on this, like Leah Stokes from Santa Barbara, if you guys know her, has been trying to push this through. There's going to be a really interesting study coming out from CLASP that looks at appliances on what would some of this policy, what if we mandated that there had to be a heat pump, or what if there were incentives at the federal level, like how quickly could it happen and how affordably. So I do think that there's a lot of good people in the Biden administration now. And I think that there's a lot of people who this is on their radar. I know we've been meeting with EPA officials and people are talking about buildings, whereas people were not talking about buildings not so long ago. So I personally do feel hopeful that there could be some pieces. I live in Colorado and I can hardly find an incentive for an induction stove for my sister in Denver anywhere. And so I think, like, for most of the country who don't have, who have either combined or gas only utilities, it's really challenging. So I think what we started to see is we've got to push for this at the federal level and at the state level. So I wish I had more details, but Leah Stokes and others are working on it. And I think that there are those discussions happening, and be happy to share more. We have a federal working group. As that comes out, we can share that with PSR San Francisco Bay.
Thanks, Brady. Any other questions from the audience? I think I've gotten at what's been brought up in the chat.
There is another question in the chat by our fantastic intern, Daisy. Daisy, I encourage you to ask it in person.
Yeah, of course. So I was just curious, it seems like there's a lot of a legislative action we would love to have, but from an individual perspective, as a renter, do you have any recommendations on how we may advocate for electrification with our landlords?
Great question.
So I'll go ahead and say, so with landlords, it's a tough one because of the split incentive. If they put in efficient new appliances and the tenant benefits with their power bills, then that's a little tricky, but there are a lot of new programs to support multifamily building owners now, especially in the Bay Area through Bay Run. There's a special targeted program to help train up more contractors, because yes, to the point earlier from Barbara, a lot of contractors will advise against going electric, but also to add greater incentives for the multifamily building owners so that when it's time to do the major renovations, that the balance is tipped in the other direction, meaning that they get greater incentives if they go electric with cleaner, more efficient products. And on top of that, there are some city-based ordinances that would eventually require that as building owners replace heaters or water heaters, that they must go towards zero emission products and phase out gas use. So I know people sometimes are not fond of mandates, but sometimes as we're at the beginning of this market transformation, that's kind of the most effective way to get that change started, especially coupled with the incentives and rebates. So where last year it might have been a lot more expensive to replace with heat pumps and electric devices, that those costs are coming down and the rebates are going up. And in the meantime, a lot more contractors are getting trained up every day. So I know it seems a little difficult right now because we're in the beginning of the transformation, but consider this your new iPhone and it'll be popular soon.
Yeah, just quickly, I would say precisely that question that Daisy raised is why one of the things that we're advancing in San Francisco is having a climate equity hub, which is a resource for tenants, for contractors, for others on building electrification, energy efficiency, and other matters. Because I think definitely the information is needed out there. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Patrice Sutton has her hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I look like I'm in the witness protection program. I'm just in a very bad place for Zoom. I just wanted to see if Antonio so I understood that. Thank you all to the speakers. This is just so informative and wonderful. So first of all, thank you so much. But I was specifically just wanted to get back in your talk. You had mentioned about this whole process that took place in before, and then even sounds like it continued in San Francisco during COVID, and that there's might be hearings in this summer. And I guess, could you elaborate a little bit more on kind of what is happening locally and how the work and all of that. I really respect the way you pointed out that actually the process matters, and having obviously a huge investment in bringing folks together like that. And I just was wondering what are the next steps, and what are some of the things that are going to be asked for in those hearings and that type of thing. Thank you so much.
Sure, I appreciate that question. So I would say two things. One is that as I mentioned, the strategies and actions from our stakeholder process around residential building electrification are incorporated in the update to the city's climate action plan, to San Francisco's climate action plan. Actually, the comment period just ended in terms of providing comment to the climate action plan, but presumably there'll be after it's finalized by the Department of Environment, some hearings. We've heard from one of the supervisors that they want to call hearings to get more feedback from the public on what the city comes up with. So point number one, that's one way. And as I mentioned earlier, can pass on the information to PSR San Francisco to share with all the participants. Point number two is that there's also a report that's being done by the budget and legislative analysts on the matter, and so the report is being released within the next month or so, and there will be a hearing about that for the BLA to report to the supervisors about the report itself, and then to hear from the public. So once again, that isn't scheduled because the report is yet to be released, but as I mentioned, can definitely get the information to PSR folks to share with all the participants here.
Thank you so much, Antonio. That's great, and will be really valued for us to be able to get through our network. I think that we're gonna, excuse me?
Oh, I was just agreeing and saying, yes, we will be happy to help promote that and share that, Antonio. And I have a quick question. An electrician told me recently that electric heating systems are actually illegal in California right now. I'm curious to know if that's true. I didn't think so. I see. So Diane Bailey's shaking her head.
No, yeah, I think they're thinking about the old time electric resistance heaters, like baseboard heaters. Those are resistance. So that's like very simple heating, like what your toaster does. That's true. Those don't meet the efficiency standards for California, but heat pumps are incredibly efficient and those work fine.
Thank you. Bob, I just wanted to make one last call for questions to see if there are any more questions. Anybody who has been hesitant to speak up, speak up. We want to hear from you. No?
There have been some more comments and questions in the chat, more on the specs, but I think unless people want to speak up, that there have been answers supplied by either our panelists or other people, such as Robert Whitehair, who Diane had referenced, has supplied a lot of very specific answers to some of the problems that people have or issues that have come up. Otherwise, I'd really want to thank our panel. I think this has been a very interesting discussion, touching on a lot of issues and a lot of the challenges we still have. The questions that have come up point to it, and we're looking forward to continuing our work with all of you to advance this project, because obviously we need to address these issues, but advance on this for our climate and public health. Any other questions before I turn it over to Julie? Really appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead, Julie, please. Turn it
I
over.
could make one last plug to sign up for Sfba PSR's newsletter. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. We're everywhere now. Also, please sign up for the action. I've put the link to RMI's action list in the chat, and so you can sign up for the action there. Obviously, this is a really important issue, and we would love to get all of you more involved. Thank you so much to Antonio, Diane, and Brady for your fantastic, educational, inspiring talks tonight. And Bob, did you want to say a few last words?
I just again want to really thank everybody and looking forward to our continued work on this in California and in terms of our other chapters working on this around the country. So this session has been recorded. You'll be able to get back to it. A lot of good information in the chat that we have fixed up our logistics, so you could save that chat if you click on the bottom of it and get all those sources as well. So again, my great appreciation to all of our panelists and for all of you turning out in an evening like tonight, and look forward to our next webinar. Thank you, Julie, for pulling all of this together.
Thank you for putting this together.